point of nuclear weapons, that you have them in order to prevent the risk of nuclear war. In that sense, they're used every single day.
Jeremy Quinn, I wonder if you could summarise for us the main points or the main conclusions of your investigation and your answers to the question, are we ready?
Well, thank you for that, Adam. It's a 100-page report, and I'd recommend it. There's a lot in there. But the three areas that we're really focused on is it's answering the question which you pose: are we ready for the worst case scenario? The armed forces, we should be very proud of them. They do a huge amount. They are very operationally committed. But in that worst case scenario, we've seen evidence of high intensity, prolonged warfare on our own continent over the last 2 years. Are we ready for that eventuality? We have concerns. We have concerns that we don't have the munition stockpiles that we would need. We're also concerned in the longer term that industry isn't ready to provide prolonged replenishment, that they haven't got the line set up, they haven't got the personnel and the kit ready to constantly supply if they were needed to in that scenario. We're also worried about personnel, both recruitment and retention, and to some extent overstretch as well. That in the old days of the Cold War, we had a lot of forces at contingency who were training for that scenario the whole time. We don't have that so much flexibility now. Are we asking too much of our armed forces in expecting them to be that operationally committed, whilst at the same time preparing for high intensity modern warfare? It's a big ask, and those are the questions we posed, and we found that there is a lot of work needing to be done.
Now, you're obviously referring to the Ukraine conflict when you talk about a high intensity war in Europe. What some of the critics of this apparent call to arms or call for more defence spending or call for more recruitment in the armed forces, what some of them are saying is, look, that's why we're in NATO, that we're not going to have to fight this war on our own. So therefore, do we really need to beef up in all these areas?
Well, you're absolutely right that the nightmare scenario we're talking about here is one that we would be confronting alongside good allies and good friends from across Europe and further afield. Absolutely right that we need to work with our allies. And it's very welcome, actually, that we've got Operation Steadfast Defender getting underway, which the UK has got a huge commitment to, which is a cross-NATO exercise, first one on that scale since the end of the Cold War. But we need to make certain that for our contribution to NATO, and we are really relied on by our allies, that we have the wherewithal in terms of personnel and in terms of munitions to be able to do everything that we is required of us as a good ally and as a good partner. Now, we are better than most in NATO, fully accept that, fully welcome the fact that we are one of those spending more than 2%, and we should be, as we are, pushing others to do more. But we need, given the operational tempo of the UK armed forces and our global, the amount of stuff we do out of Europe, the amount of stuff we do globally, we need to make certain that we are ready for all eventualities.
So Simon Fraser, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, of course, has said we're in a pre-war phase, which sounds pretty threatening. Do you think we're panicking a bit?
Well, I don't think we're panicking. I don't myself think that we are on the brink of all-out war. I certainly hope not. But obviously, we do have to be aware of heightened risks, and there are heightened risks. And to the extent possible, we should be ready to respond because conflicts do happen, and it's all too easy to be complacent about them. So my basic position is we need to avoid both alarmism and complacency, and we need to think very carefully about the different risks that we face. Some people, for example, say we are now in a third world war with China. Personally, I don't agree with that description of that confrontation. It's a much more complex thing. Others are talking, as Jeremy has, about the threat from Russia, and clearly that is increasingly worrying for us in Europe. And we need to think hard about it and with allies, be as prepared as we can to deal with the different potential risks. But the preparation and and being aware is really complicated stuff because of the timelines that are involved in military procurement programs and so forth. And also, history sort of tells you prepare for one thing and something else happens. So you've got to build in a certain amount of contingency into all your planning.
And Sam, do you think that we are in need of spending more, of beefing up our Navy, of beefing up our recruitment, or do you think that's unnecessary at this stage?
Well, I mean, it's an ongoing issue. I mean, when I was working in the Foreign Office, we had similar sorts of concerns at different times. The problem is, as Jeremy says, we already are spending over 2% of GDP on defence. There's a sense that we need to spend more, but if you spend more on defence, you spend less on other things, and there are many other competing priorities for any government: the health service, education, etc. So it's really difficult for government to make that choice. I think what we can do is be as efficient as possible, both in our own planning and as realistic as possible in the equipment programs. And as you say, balancing the resources between the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and working as efficiently as possible in the defense industry with other allies to avoid waste and duplication and get maximum interoperability across NATO in particular, to use what we've got to the best effect.
So, Simon, can I ask you, are you concerned about Donald Trump returning to the White House? I mean, you mentioned that a lot of this will be built on, how we work with other countries around the world. How do you think that could change things, and are you concerned about it?
I am concerned about it to the extent that I think it's the big open question that hangs over so much at the moment in foreign and international policy and defence policy, because whilst, again, I'm not one of those who says everything about Donald Trump would necessarily be bad, the fact is that if he came back, I think the situation in relation to Ukraine and Russia would be more uncertain. Clearly, American support for NATO would be brought back into question, and that would risk sort of destabilizing the relationship between the Europeans and the European allies and the American allies at a time when we are facing this crisis in Ukraine, and Putin is sort of hanging on there, waiting to see what happens. And so that is potentially a matter of concern, and we do need to think about it. And that would, and if America reduced its defence support for Europe, that would definitely lead to pressure for more defence spending from Europeans of the sort that Adam raised.
Jeremy, do you agree that Donald Trump is the big open question here? Because, I mean, there are lots of uncertainties about how he would approach, particularly things like Ukraine.
There are. I would also say there is a consistency regarding American policy. I mean, in past reports that my committee has done, we've drawn out the fact that it is so important for us to be working collaboratively with the US over a range of theatres, over a range of issues, and that works two ways. I think there is inside the US system an appreciation of the need to work alongside allies, of the importance of NATO. So obviously, one has to take a careful watching brief whenever there is a change of administration in the US. If that comes to pass in November, I dare say there will be consequences. But I also think there is a huge amount in the interests of the United States to maintain continuity in many aspects of their foreign and defence policy, as has historically been the case.
And Jeremy, we've had a question sent in here from somebody, but it's actually very well related to a piece in the Sunday Times today by Lawrence Friedman, a really interesting and very long article about the future of war. This person says, why do we need a citizen army when we have nuclear weapons, or are they a waste of money because they can't be used? Now, Friedman in his article suggests the same thing. We didn't expect a very long running sort of trench warfare style campaign in Russia and Ukraine, and that's what we've got. What's the future for nuclear weapons? Are they just never going to be used? I mean, how do they play into this conversation?
Well, Kate, clearly they haven't been used since 1945, and that's what we want. We want the very fact that they're not being used in the sense of actually being causing nuclear explosions is exactly the point of nuclear weapons, that you have them in order to prevent the risk of nuclear war. In that sense, they're used every single day